What's up, everybody? Today I'm here to talk about Spinetinglers, a Goosebumps knockoff series that was released in the mid-90s. And I have a few books here in the series, and I've read most of them over the last couple of years now. So I figured I'd just cover these books real quick and talk about the series a little bit as a whole. And the ones that I have are Billy Baker's Dog Won't Stay Buried, Killer Computer, The Monster Channel, Step on a Crack, and The Dead Kid Did It. So I'm going to talk about this one first because this is the one that I read most recently, and that is Billy Baker's Dog Won't Stay Buried. Now, the Spinetinglers series, the author's name at the bottom of each book is M.T. Coffin, which is just a pen name, and various different authors contributed to this series. There's a few authors that have written multiple entries in this series, and I believe there are some authors that contributed maybe only like one or two books. And I'm really not too familiar with the different authors that contributed to this series. I think some of them probably have a good deal of experience writing children's fiction, and I know some of them have written other books outside of this series. Others, I'm not really so sure on. But yeah, this was the one that I read most recently, and this was actually a buddy read with my friends BD Horror and Goosebumps Completionist, whose channels I will link down below in the description. And this one is basically, in case the title doesn't give it away, it's basically about a dog that comes back to life. And it starts out pretty good. It's pretty dark, and there's a surprising amount of emotion to this in the beginning. Essentially, the main character has to have his dog put down because his dog attacks the neighbor, and the neighbor was like provoking the dog and being a jerk to him, and the dog kind of attacked him, but they have to put the dog down like so they don't get sued, so the kid doesn't get in trouble or anything like that. And yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. kind of a dark way to set up a kid's book. And so this one definitely had my attention at first. But as this one goes along, it really starts to lose me. There's this whole thing called like the Church of the Resurrected Pets or something like that. I can't even remember the name of it now, but there's like this whole church that's kind of like a religious cult in this book dedicated to like dead pets and like this cemetery that they're buried in, and that they believe there's going to be this night of the resurrection when the pets all come back to life. And the main character also believes that his dog that was put down is going to come back to life, and he's waiting for him to come back. And we don't really get any solid explanation as to why any of this is. It's just there in the story, and you're just expected to like go along with this, I guess. And I had a really hard time getting into it for that reason. That whole setup is just really bizarre. It just kind of bothered me. It really kept me from becoming immersed in the story in any way. There's a lot of logical inconsistencies with this one. So like I said, there is some cool ideas here, and I am a sucker for animal stories. So I thought this would be up my alley. And like I said, it did have a pretty good opening. But we're just introduced to some more stuff that's just doesn't really have any explanation behind it. There's this guy that's like the head of the church who's also a police officer. I don't even remember his name. Chief Rory, I don't know how to pronounce his name. And he's set up as to be like the main villain of the story. But then in like the second and third act of the story, he just kind of disappears. He's set up as a villain in the sense like he's the head of this church and he's just trying to like swindle people out of their money. And it kind of gives this book like a dark aspect to it in terms of like having some of that like religious material, some of like that cult stuff, almost like it's making some kind of commentary on it. But it never really goes anywhere with it. It's just kind of there. And then the main villain, the head of the church, he just sort of disappears. He doesn't really have any role to play later on in the story. And this just feels like a really poorly executed book. It almost feels like a rough draft to me. And the ending, the last couple chapters just feel super rushed. It felt like the author of this one, let me check real quick. George Edward Stanley was on a deadline when writing this, and he had to just quickly wrap things up. And there's a lot that happens within the last couple of chapters, but it's written in a way where it's just like summarized. Like we don't actually get to see any of it really happen or take place. And that, I feel like a lot of like the third act of this book is just kind of quickly summarized. A lot of the characters eventually, like in the climax of this book, like all of the pets come back to life. And like the whole plot of it is these pets are coming back to get revenge on their owners or on the people that wronged them. And this sounds like a cool idea on paper, but we really don't get to see that much of it actually happen. There's not a lot of action to it. It's just a lot of the characters talking about it, thinking what they should do about it. And then at the end, it just feels very rushed. We get a quick resolution, quick climax. It just, I don't know. This one didn't really work for me, but it wasn't terrible. I gave it like a 2.5 out of 5 stars, rounded down to 2. So yeah, this one was a buddy read with my friends BD Horror and Goosebumps Completionist, as I mentioned. I don't think they have reviews for this up yet at the time I'm making this video. They might by the time I post this, I'm not sure. But yeah, this one was just kind of okay. I know that they both like this a lot more than me, so I'm curious to go watch their videos and see their thoughts on it whenever they do those. But yeah, that was Billy Baker's Dog Won't Stay Buried. This is the second one in the series. And I'm going to be kind of going in reverse order here. So this was the one that I read just before Billy Baker. I read this one last month, and this is Killer Computer. And the one thing that I do like about this Spinetinglers series as a whole is that there's a lot of variety to it, with each book having different authors. There's a lot of different ideas. Every book just feels completely different. It doesn't get stale after a while. Like, I hate to admit this, but Goosebumps, as much as I love Goosebumps, it does get a little bit stale if you read too many in a row, because it's R.L. Stine most of the time. I mean, there are a few that are ghostwritten, like in the Give Yourself Goosebumps series and things like that. But most of them are written by R.L. Stine, and after a while, a lot of them just do feel the same. So there's a nice variety to this Spinetingler series, with each book being penned by a different author. And there's also, from what I've read so far, and from what I've seen others review of these books so far, there's a lot of high books in this series, ones that are really, really good. This is one of them, which I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. And there's also a lot of really, really terrible ones, it seems like. So yeah, there's a lot of ups and downs in this series. But I do like the nice variety that we get with it, and I do want to read more of these books. But this was the one that I read just before Billy Baker, Killer Computer. And this one was written by Robert Hirschfield. And what's a bit strange to me is that Robert Hirschfield only wrote a couple of other books. He's not nearly as prolific as the previous author was, George Edward Stanley of the Billy Baker book. He's contributed, I think, multiple books to this series, and I think this is the only one that Bob Hirschfield contributed to this series. And this book is 10 times better than Billy Baker's Dog. This is actually probably one of the best Goosebumps knockoff books I've ever read. And this one was sent to me and recommended to me by my good friend Austin over at Goosebumps Completionist. And this one is basically, well, kind of as the cover art and the title implies, a killer computer. It's basically this computer virus that sort of takes over this computer. It's a very like gradual process. And it introduces itself as like a friendly computer program right away, like this friendly artificial intelligence. And it sort of invites the main character, the protagonist, to engage with it in like computer games, things like that. It presents itself as like a friendly entity. And as the story progresses, it's revealed that this computer virus, what the main character thinks is like just some kind of, artificial intelligence or computer program at first. It becomes revealed that this is not a friendly entity, that this computer virus is a lot more powerful and evil than it has led the characters to believe it is. And this one goes in some pretty dark and mature places as well, perhaps more so than Billy Baker's Dog Won't Stay Buried. There's one scene in this book where the computer virus kind of hypnotizes the younger brother of the main character, and there's a pretty violent scene in regards to that. And yeah, this was just a really good book, and I was surprised at how well written this was. I feel like it does stay family friendly for the most part, but it feels really well written in the sense that all of the characters are very smart here, very intelligent. A lot of these kids' horror books, I've noticed, don't really seem to hold the reader in high regard. Like kind of like the last one, there's just logical inconsistencies. A lot of the characters are stupid. It just feels like some of them you just have to turn off part of your brain when you're reading it, ignore a lot of the plot holes, pretend that the characters aren't that dumb, and just kind of go along for the ride. This one does not insult the reader and the reader's intelligence in any way, shape, or form. This is a very smartly written book, in my opinion, very well written. It almost feels like young adult. In terms of writing, not necessarily in terms of content. There are a few violent scenes in here, don't get me wrong. But it still feels family friendly, kid friendly for the most part. And yeah, this was just a really good one. I liked how well plotted this book was, just how smart it was. It has a great like resolution and climax. I really don't have any major complaints with this. The only thing that kept me from rating it higher than I did, my final rating for this book, by the way, I think I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, just rounded up to a solid 4 out of 5 stars. What kept me from rating it higher, I think, is just the subject matter. It's not particularly a subject that appeals to me all that much. Artificial intelligence, like computer type stuff. That's just not like a subgenre that fits my tastes. But yeah, this was just a really solid one. Definitely my favorite Spinetinglers book that I've read so far. So yeah, this one is number 12 in the series. And this was a great one. If you're looking to check out some like more non-Goosebumps kids horror stuff, I would highly recommend giving this one a go. Killer Computer was great. Okay. And then the one I read before that, I read this last year. It was number 9 in the series, Step on a Crack. And this one was by, let's see here, C.J. Henderson is the author that wrote Step on a Crack. And I did talk about this book in one of my previous videos, and this was one of my favorite children's horror books that I read last year. And I absolutely love the concept and the idea to this book. This one is basically about like this cosmic entity that lives beneath the earth underground, and he like forms or he creates like these earthquakes and such, and causes like rifts and cracks in the ground, and tries to like suck people down into the ground and basically kill them. And this one also has some very, very violent, surprisingly violent and gory scenes in it for a kid's book. The prologue, there is a lot of description of blood in it. There are actually deaths in this book. That's something that you don't typically see a lot of in kids horror. I feel like that's kind of like where the border is. Usually they try to keep characters from dying to keep it kid friendly or whatever, age appropriate. But in this book, there are characters that die in this book, especially in the prologue. There's a few deaths. And yeah, this one was just great. The one thing about it that I think I didn't like all that much is it is a little bit repetitive. And the ending to this one, like the resolution, it just felt a little bit too easy, too convenient. Yeah, and it's basically about this main character learning about this monster that lives under the earth. He's very mysterious, kind of ambiguous. It doesn't exactly tell you what it is. And the main character is just trying to figure out how to defeat it. He learns about this creature. There's these earthquakes and just different things happening in the city that he lives in. And it's basically just him like trying to stay alive and kind of battling this monster. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This was a great book. My second favorite in the Spinetinglers series so far. I gave this one a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Kind of a high 3 out of 5 stars, almost leaning more towards like 3.5. So yeah, that was Step on a Crack. And then the very first Spinetinglers book that I read, this is also one that my good friend Goosebumps Completionist sent to me, was The Monster Channel. And this one has pretty cool cover art. I mean, look at that. This might be one of my favorite covers in the series. And this one was by, I want to say it was Jim Murphy is the author of this one. Jim Simon. Okay. Jim Simon is the author of this one. This is book number 17 in the series. And unfortunately, I did not like this one at all. And this one actually turned me off from the series when I first read this. I'm like, man, do I want to keep reading these? I have a feeling I'm not going to like any of these Spinetinglers books. Fortunately, I did really end up liking those other two. But this being the first one that I read, the thing I really didn't like about this one was the writing. That's the main thing. This one has kind of a cool idea, similar to Billy Baker's Dog. but the writing to this one, not necessarily just the execution of the idea or anything like that, or logical inconsistencies. This one didn't really have too much of that from what I remember. Mainly just the writing style is very, very amateurish. This just feels like an author that does not have very much experience, especially in this genre of books. And I just could not get into it for that reason. The writing was not good. So yeah, this one I think I gave like a 1.5 out of 5 stars. I just could not get into it whatsoever. It wasn't necessarily terrible. It's basically about this monster that lives inside of this TV, and when you turn to like a certain channel, he like comes out of the TV and into the real world. That's about all I remember from it. So yeah, this one was just, it was whatever. I was not a big fan of this one, but again, it does have a cool cover, and I'll keep it in my collection. And I am grateful to my friend Austin for sending me this book and getting me turned on to the Spinetinglers books as a whole, even though I wasn't really a big fan of this one. So yeah. And then the last Spinetinglers book that I have not yet read is The Dead Kid Did It. And this one is also written by George Edward Stanley, I think. Yep. The same one who authored Billy Baker's Dog. So, and this one is number 10 in the series. So I guess we'll see how this one is when we get to it. I'm not too hopeful because I wasn't that big of a fan of Billy Baker's Dog. But yeah, those are the 5 Spinetinglers books that I have. I definitely would like to read more of these. And maybe, it might be a while before this happens, but maybe one day do like a ranking of the series if I eventually get all of them. I know the last few books in the series are extremely rare and hard to find. There's a total of 30 books in this series. And I don't know, maybe one day if I find copies of those, I'll have to read them all and do like a ranking of them. I definitely want to try more of these. Again, it seems like there's some really great books in this series and some pretty terrible ones too. Like I said, there's a lot of different authors that contributed to it. So with each book, you're getting like a completely different flavor, which is nice. No two book is the same in this series, at least from what I've seen so far. And yeah, those are my thoughts on the Spinetinglers series. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books, what your thoughts are on them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And I'm looking forward to reading more of these in the future. So yeah, those are the Spinetinglers books. That's all I have for today, guys. So thanks for watching. Peace.